All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the QT2 Systems, My Life as a Pro podcast series. In this series, we're talking to former and current pros of QT2 Systems, and our featured guest today is Amy Javens. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me, Reem.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So I'm just going to have you kind of back up in time and talk about how you entered into the sport of triathlon.
Okay. Um, well, I was an athlete my whole life from a very young age to currently being active. I was a track and field stir, so I did hurdles in high school and college. And after college, got my first job, got married, had my babies, and felt like I wanted to reclaim that athleticism back in myself. So I made it a goal to run a marathon. Never did a marathon before, didn't have any clue about marathon training or fueling or nutrition, but wanted to get back into shape. So reclaimed myself by vowing that I would do a marathon, which was 2003. I did the Pittsburgh Marathon. That's where I'm from. So I started in endurance sports back in 2003. Did the whole marathon thing for a while, did Boston in 2004, and started to have some little nagging injuries and was forced to cross train. So started my cross training and never was a very good swimmer at all. About Red Cross swim lessons is about as good as it got for me as a youngster. Was never on a swim club or swim team before, so found myself in the water doing cross training while I was injured for training for marathons, and came up with another great idea that hey, think I'm going to try a triathlon since I can somewhat move forward in the water as a swimmer, and everyone can bike, right? And I knew I could run. So started dabbling in triathlon probably around 2005-ish. Jumped into triathlon just like I jumped into marathoning and jumped into the sport and jumped into Ironman the same way. Made it a vow to do an Ironman in 2006. Again, didn't know what I was doing. I self-coached myself, didn't know anything about heart rate training zones, fueling, and nutrition, but I did manage to get through Ironman Wisconsin, and completed that in 2006, I believe. It was a bit of a survival of the fittest experience for me. And when I crossed the finish line, I thought for sure I would never, ever do an Ironman again. So that's my early stages of being a triathlete. And then
I do want to ask though for that. I mean, you started by saying you were a hurdler. So what did you do? The 100, 400? I mean,
I did 100, 300, and 400, 400 in college.
So how did you go from a sport that took less than a minute and a half to
Right. Yeah.
wanting
Yeah.
to do long course? Like,
I
did
don't know.
you think maybe, oh, like ITU or short or anything like
Yeah.
that? No, you just went straight to the long stuff.
I had friends locally who were training for an Ironman, so it sort of sucked me into the Ironman void, the Ironman black hole of Ironman. So I always am somebody who I want challenges. I always want to throw myself in a challenge and learn how to fly while doing it. So I just thought that was a really big challenge for me. Went into it totally blinded, learned a lot of things in those first few years of triathlon, especially with the Ironman that I did in Madison, Wisconsin. But yeah, I mean, I was like a power athlete, power sprinter, power athlete. I had to work really hard to become a power sprinter, power athlete. That's another whole conversation. But the hard work ethic transferred very well into Ironman training. As we know, Ironman training is not an easy feat, and you have to be disciplined, you have to be focused and goal setting to be able to do that. So just the behavior of being a track and field athlete, a Division I athlete, a state champion, that all just transferred into becoming an Ironman athlete and training for Ironman.
Okay. So 2006, crossed the finish line in Wisconsin, which is a pretty hard first race. I mean, that's
It was
very
hard. It was 50 degrees and raining. It was a big do not finish race in back then. Yeah.
Yeah, that happened, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, with similar
Yes,
conditions, I
very
think, to that.
similar.
So,
Hmm.
but really hard bike, really hard run with the steepness and everything. So you finished that race not knowing basically what you were doing. And then what? You're like, this is
Um,
awesome. I got to do another one.
Yeah, actually, I took a little break for a year or two. I had some continuing education professionally. I wanted to get done, another challenge for me. And so I just went back to just normal fitness regimens, not training for any type of triathlon for a few years, and completed that goal I had professionally, which was type of continuing education, and found myself wanting to get back to being Amy the athlete again. And I enjoyed, even though I didn't enjoy entirely that Ironman Wisconsin that I did in the cold and in having no appropriate fueling on me. I did enjoy the process of learning and training for something big. So I yearned for that again. So I hired my first coach back in 2009 and wanted to come back to the half Ironman distance. Thought that was a little bit more feasible for a mother of three daughters under the age of 12. So I sort of modified my goal a bit and made it a goal in 2009 to do Ironman Timberman, and hired my first coach for that.
Okay. And so how'd that go?
Really well. I finished on the podium for that one. I think maybe my power and, being a 70.3, completing 70.3 is a little bit different than completing an Ironman. I did really well at the 70.3 distance for a few years and placed on the podium, if not won, a bunch of age groups during the years of 2009 to 2012. And then, I would say in the beginning of 2012, latter end of 2011, decided I wanted to go back to Ironman. Made another coach switch in 2012 because the former coach I had was more of used triathlon as a vehicle to be fit and more experienced in the shorter distance triathlon. So I came to QT2 in 2012 with the focus of Ironman training specificity.
And at one point, I mean, you go on the podium, winning your age group. At what point did you say, I think I want to take this to the next level?
Yeah, 2012 was my first year, was my year back to Ironman. That's when I hired QT2, who I was led to by a friend of mine, who was also a triathlete who ended up becoming pro around the same time I did. Her name's Jocelyn Kornman, really great friend of mine. We did a lot of traveling together in my early pro years, as a pro triathlete. She guided me to QT2. I noticed her bike got significantly faster within like 6 to 8 months. And I had asked her, like, what are you doing? Why is your bike getting so fast? And she pointed me in the direction of QT2. So I started with QT2 in July 2012. 8 weeks later, I raced Ironman Louisville. That's when I placed second overall amateur. And at that time, if you placed second overall amateur in a professional race, you had earned, you were able to get a pro card, to apply for a pro card. So that was probably the eye-opening race that led me to believe, like, hey, this is maybe something I could do on a professional level. And I was at a certain part of my life where I was in between professions, took a break from my profession for a while, and was just looking for a new direction, a new path to go. And that it just sort of, how things happen at the right time, at the right place. I just saw it as a opportunity to put myself in a situation and in a experience where I could grow as an athlete and also as a coach too, because I'm a coach also.
So did you, after Ironman Louisville, did you decide to apply for the pro card at that point?
Yeah, so I sat on it for about 6 months. I took in all the advice from many different kinds of people. Advice as, advice people giving me like, no, just stay age group, be like a rock star age grouper, to, hey, you only live once, try, take the dive into it. So I sat on it for a while, and I think I had like, I don't know, maybe 10 months or so to be able to apply to be a pro before it expired. And about any, I can't remember, it was maybe 6 to 10 months later, I ended up applying and I got my pro card. So I put a lot of thought into it. I was very realistic going into it. I knew what my ability was, what my experience level was, which wasn't much. But I went into it as a person who wasn't going to fear failure, and just to have a perspective that this is going to really put me in a great situation where I can learn a lot from the people around me and learn a lot about myself in the process.
Okay. So, I mean, when you walked into it, triathlon, we're going to talk about this a little later, but most professional triathletes don't make a ton of money. So when you looked at it and you went into it, I mean, the thought process couldn't have been, oh, good, I'm going to make like,
No.
make my
Yeah.
millions, right? As you signed. So what was it about like that you thought you would get racing as a pro that you didn't think you would get as an
So I
amateur?
knew I wanted to compete no matter what level it was. I knew I wanted to compete. I knew that this was going to be a part of my life for a really, really long time. As everybody knows, the sport of triathlon is not a cheap sport. I go over this every day with the athletes who are starting up with me. It's such an expensive sport. So for me, it was more or less a financial decision to go pro, because at that time, which was the tail end of 2013, there were a lot more sponsorship opportunities than what you see now for professionals, unless you're like the top 1% professional in the field. 2013 was probably before the big, and was surely before the big bang of Instagram influencers. A lot of pros did have sponsors. A lot of mid-level pros did have sponsors at that time. So I got in at a time, at the tail end of that time, before a lot of the companies started doing more social media influencers, just age group influencers. So there was a little bit of money with sponsorships and having equipment for me at that time. I also was opted into the QT2 pro team. We had a pro team at that time. I think at one time we had 30 pros on our team, 20 or 30 pros. So with that, I had the advantage of, wheel sets, wetsuits, fueling. I had my own fueling sponsor. So I had sponsorship with QT2 Pro Team, and I also had some personal brand sponsorship too. So when all that money sort of added up, like I was able to sustain myself in the sport. And then I would say around that time, the end of 2013, 2014, Ironman had changed a lot of the structure of their racing from all pro races to maybe like half of them got cut, and that's when you saw the emerging of age only races. And then there were races, 50% of the Ironman races had a pro field. So at that time, we went from maybe 8 or 10 pros at the starting line. I believe in 2015, after Ironman had changed from 100% pro field to 50% of pro field in their races. I think there was 38 pro women at the Ironman Chattanooga starting line in 2015. I finished around 950. I was 18th place with a 950. So it made it a lot more difficult to earn a prize purse after that 2013, 2000, after 2014. It became a lot more difficult because there were so many pros lining up at the starting line than what you had before. The way I made my money is I was a contracted coach with QT2. So I made my money that way. Being a pro at that time, also Ironman, you could register for any races for free if you just paid an Ironman Pro membership. So you were able to sign up for any races that you wanted. And then Ironman also gave travel perks as far as homestays. When I traveled to Australia, I got a travel stipend. So those were also perks for me too.
Okay. So, all right. So let me take you back. Talk to me
Mhm.
about your first pro race.
Oh, yes. I had to think about this one, Reem. I'm like, which one was my first race? Because they all sort of blend together now. Yes, so it was Ironman Austin, I believe, 70.3. Okay. So, you would think like your first race would be this most immaculate experience. For me, it was the total opposite. Everything that went wrong could have went wrong. From my car getting broken into before the race and most of my gear getting stolen, except for my wetsuit, thank God, to my wetsuit arm getting ripped off by the wetsuit stripper going into transition one and trying to figure out how to get just an arm sleeve off. To running through the mud in the pro transition area and not being able to clip into my speed plays until mile 30 with my left foot and mile 50 with my right foot. I remember going down hills, like putting my finger in my speed play hole in my in my bike shoe, trying to get the mud out and then trying to kick the mud out. So pretty much that whole bike, I wasn't able to clip in to my pedals. And then finally, the run did go somewhat okay. And I did end up smiling at the finish line, my first pro race. So yeah, definitely not what I expected. But then again, a big learning experience for me on that things can always go wrong.
So just when you stood at that swim start line as a pro, what was that like that first time? What was your feeling as you looked around you?
Oh my gosh, it was such a great feeling. Like I wasn't intimidated. I would, we talk a lot in our QT2 system about MAF athletes and MAS athletes, motivated by the achievement of success and motivated by the avoidance of failure. I was definitely more of the MAS athlete at that time because I felt like I had things in perspective. I knew where my talent was. I knew where my experience was. I knew like at the end of the day, I would probably end up in the middle if it was ideal conditions for everybody. And I took it in as a learning experience and a journey. So there was a lot of appreciation, being able to stand or wade or skull at a starting line in the water next to an Olympic champion or a past Ironman champion was like really a cool experience. And the ladies that I competed with were just really great people, just super, super friendly. Everyone was out there for each other, to have like an Olympic gold medalist turn to you and say, hey, good luck, or hey, I'll move over a little bit so you can have your spot here. Like it was just an amazing experience. And to be able to surround myself literally with those kind of people and take in things, it was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, times how many times I lined up at the starting line with the pros.
Yeah, so after going through that race and all those things that went wrong, but you kept going, you finished. And when you finished that first race, was that like reinforcing that you made the right decision? Or
I
were
think
you
so. Yeah,
okay?
yeah. Because I was very realistic going into it. It took me a long time to come up with the decision. It wasn't a decision to go pro that I made with haste. I spoke to a lot of people. I knew where I was. I was just happy, and whatever I did that was wrong, like I knew, okay, well, next time I'm not going to do that, right? My wetsuit arm, got ripped off because I put my Garmin on top of the sleeve of my wetsuit arm. So now I know to stick my Garmin underneath the wetsuit arm. It was like those little things. It leveled me up to think about the 1% that I couldn't afford to not use, to make me level up a little bit closer to the top of the industry.
Okay. So then where did you go from there? Like, how did you go about figuring out which races you're going to do
Yeah,
in the future?
so a lot of it was timing. What worked with mom traveling at certain times of the year. I obviously did not want to do a race in the middle of my daughter's swim season. I didn't want to miss that. So a lot of it worked with my personal schedule. A lot of it worked with where my strengths lie. I'm not a real great hill climber, so I wasn't going to go do a race that was 8,000 feet elevation gain. So a lot of it, I tried to play to my strengths, timing of things. I scheduled anywhere from 2 to 3 Ironmans per year. I also partaked into our camps and our pro camps that we had for multiple years. So I would get heavy training load earlier in the season that helped boost my fitness pretty early. We're talking 40 hours of cardiovascular training time per week at those pro camps. Never thought I could accomplish and put in so much volume in such a short amount of time. But it was great in the fact that I knew where I could push myself, and I knew what I needed to do to recover well, to be able to keep pushing myself forward. And the camps were very instrumental for me to basically just focus on me, because as a pro, it's time invested in yourself to better yourself as an athlete. And that was hard to do at home with my children. And, even though I was resting, I wasn't resting. I was still on mom duty. So it was a time that I was able to just focus on me for, 20 days or so, and have my angel of a husband hold down the fort while I was away. But those fitness boosts from Pro Camp were really, really instrumental. Hanging out with the other pros that we had at the time was wonderful. Lindsay Corbin, riding next to her, was great. I remember a lot of times, we all had our times at camp where we struggled, and maybe we cried, or we were like, I don't think I can do this. And I remember looking at Lindsay and saying to her once, and you're going to know exactly what I'm going to say here. And I said, Lindsay, don't think, just do. And she uses that quote from there on. And it's a great quote. Like, our brains get in the way of things, and if we just don't think and we just do things, like, we have to trust our bodies that we're able to do it. So just the collaboration with the other pros were great in boosting morale and boosting confidence. And then I did also raise 70.3, even though the more aerobic I became, the less a 70.3 athlete I became. Plus I was older, so I didn't have my hurdling springy legs anymore. So I concentrated mostly on the Ironmans, and I used the 70.3 as prep races to build for Ironman anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks out. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where I went from there.
So to get your pro license, I mean, you basically said if you win an amateur race, you get your pro license. What do you need to do to maintain your pro license?
So you have to reapply for it. At that time, things have probably changed. I think back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was 10 years ago when I started going pro. So things obviously have changed with USAT and what the qualifications are. But at that time, I believe it was every 2 years you had to reapply, and you had to be a certain percentage behind the winner's time to continue your pro license. It might have been 10%. I'm not sure if that's the exact percentage at all, because it's been like eight 6 years since I've had to go through that. But you had to show proof that you could finish, that you had finished at a pro purse race, a certain percentage behind the winning time. So I was able to do that once or twice. I can't remember. So I was able to reapply for it and get it.
Okay. So do you have, as a pro, is there one race that you look back on and you're like, oh yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
That was the
definitely.
day.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there definitely is a race. I would have to they say this there was a season with a
Okay.
bunch of experiences for
Okay.
me. For me, it was my 2015 season. It was my season with the most diversity and the most hardship, but it was also the season that I remember, and I feel like I had performed the ultimate that I could have performed. I had a couple bike crashes in 2015. One that was pretty bad. I couldn't finish the race just because I was numb from the hips down in a ditch from a clincher tube exploding because I hit a pothole or like a hole in the pavement, and basically I flatted and skidded down a hill, and it was a pretty bad wreck. So that was earlier in the season. I had to build myself back up after about 4 or 5 weeks of rest and slow get back to it of training. And I ended up, oh gosh, that's the year I did Ironman Chattanooga that I mentioned before. And at the last minute, decided to register for Beach to Battleship, which was a non-branded Ironman race at that time, which is now Ironman North Carolina 70.3, which at one time there was an Ironman North Carolina, right? So now it's just Ironman North Carolina 70.3, but it was Beach to Battleship set up events, and they did have a pro race. So I had been eyeing it all year after this crash, and I thought the world was ending and I couldn't move too well. And I had been eyeing it up, and I knew I was going to do Chattanooga. So I did Chattanooga, had a pretty good race for me, and I thought I would just ride that fitness into Beach to Battleship, and just made sure for the next 2 weeks, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks apart from each other, I just made sure I got lots of rest. I think I slept like 10 or 11 hours a day, just, touch base on the bike, the swim, the run. And because I knew the fitness boost I got from Chattanooga was going to carry me through Beach to Battleship. And I mentioned earlier, I really focused on races I knew I would do well. So one prerequisite for me was a down current swim. So if you know Ironman North Carolina, it does have a strong current with that swim. I think I came out in 49 minutes for a full Ironman swim, which normally at that time I probably would have been a 105, 107. So I knew that a current swim would be advantageous for me because it equalizes the playing field from the faster swimmers, and swimming was always my limiter. It was a super flat, windy bike, which I'm very strong in. I live in Pennsylvania, but I'm about 2 miles away from the Ohio state line. So I ride all the time out on the flat, windy farmlands of Ohio. So that was definitely a strength of mine. So I knew the bike course would work for me well. And then the run is through the town of Wilmington, North Carolina, just a lot of crowd support. And it was a small field for me. So I knew the potential of me doing really well with my fitness level at that time would have been a really nice boost for me and my morale and my confidence. So I did that race and I won it. It was a really small pro field. I won a pro purse. It was awesome. It was a time that it was like just a really, really great experience where I couldn't believe what my body did for me. So that was definitely a really great season for me. It was the one of the most diversity and injuries, but it was also the most rewarding that if I just stuck with it, amazing things would happen. And then I would follow up with my second best experience was in 2014. I raced Ironman Louisville, and this was when Louisville was super hot. And in August, I was really good at heat. I was good in the heat. I raced well in the heat. And it was like one of those survival of the fittest races where one at one, all the pros kept falling out. And then there's me, Amy, the little engine that could just kept moving along. So I ended up fourth overall pro at that race, thanks to my stick to itness and my grit bank that I had on that day. So I would say those were probably my two biggest highlights. My experience was Ironman Australia because I got to travel for that race, and it was an okay race for me. So that was a fun experience of a race.
So when you were lying in bed, I mean, you were really injured. Did you think, I mean, like as you're talking, you're like, okay, I sat there in bed going, okay, how am I going to come up with my rest of my season?
Yeah.
Did you ever think, okay, well, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe I should just like stop
Yeah,
after
no,
this?
that was never an
No?
option for me. No. I mean, I knew the body would heal. Um, and I think I was most upset. I was 2 weeks out from Coeur d'Alene. I was supposed to race Coeur d'Alene in June. I was 2 weeks out, and oh man, my fitness level was like through the roof. Like I saw paces I had never seen before. And I think I was more upset that of my losing my fitness, because I imagined as fitness as sand, holding sand in my palm. And each day I wasn't able to train, I could see just like that sand of fitness going through my fingers and going away to like a little bit of sand left. Like I literally was most upset about losing that fitness that I knew I had. And so I knew I had to come back and redeem myself. Um, Later, and I knew it couldn't be right away because I had to heal. And I had some hairline fractures in my hips, and it just was not good. I could show you my scars, all my scars I have, but I knew I had to come back, and I knew it wasn't going to be right away. So I had focused in on late season races with Chattanooga, and then I'm like, hey, I'm just going to ride this fitness and see how I do at Beach to Battleship. So yeah, it wasn't an option to give up. I had sacrificed so much for that lifestyle and being a pro, and my family had sacrificed so much that it would be a disservice to myself and a disservice to my family to be like, I'm done. I'm done with this. So yeah.
Yeah. So you kept going, you got the win. I mean, that's God,
Mhm.
that must have been amazing.
It was
Just
great.
because
Like
you
I
had
came
won.
through at 9:26. I say it was a sub 5 bike because I got stuck behind a semi tractor trailer at one of the stop signs. So I think it was like a 5 hour and 7 second bike. So I consider it my first sub 5 bike, and minus the tractor trailer who got in my way. And it was my best marathon off the bike. So yeah, I think I came through at 9:26. Of course, it was a current aided swim, but maybe by 10 or 15 minutes. So
Mhm.
I was really happy. Like I consistently was racing, 940 to 950 times there for a while, which I would never have ever thought at the age of 43 that I would have been racing those times.
Right.
Mhm.
Impressive. Um, so when did you decide that the pro life was something that you were ready to put behind you and
Well, you
move
know how
on?
the saying goes, start with the end in mind, right?
Okay.
So
Mhm.
I always knew how I would end it. I knew once when I turned 45 that that was going to be it. So I had a really small window from about 41 to 45 to do what I needed to do. And And yeah, so when I turned 45, that's when I went back to age group. And I also knew when I started zipping up wetsuits of fellow pro women who could have been my daughter's age. So once when I think I actually had like one woman say, "Thanks, Mom," to me. And I'm like, it might be time. It might be time. I sort of felt like mom at the starting line there for a while. So, yeah, but seriously, I knew like once when I hit 45, I was going to go back to age group for a year or two. And that's what I did.
So what was your last race as a pro?
My last race as a pro, I had to really think about this because it like to me, um, like it wasn't really a big deal for me. I would say the biggest deal for me was my last races as an age grouper. Yeah. So I would say that was definitely more memorable than my last race as a pro. Yeah, when I thought about it, I was like, which race was it? And it was Ironman Arizona in 2016. And it wasn't too exciting race. I wouldn't say it was my best race. I wouldn't say it was like the worst race ever. It was like an okay kind of race for me. But yeah, that was my last race as a pro. In 2017, I did go back as an age grouper, and I had some injuries at the beginning of 2017 because my grandmaster plan, right? We all have grandmaster plans that don't ever really happen. Our plan A's don't, and then plan B's happen, right? So my plan A plan was to qualify for Kona in 2017 and hopefully get on the podium at Kona because my times supported that. That's what I, could have been able to do. But unfortunately, I got an injury. I believe it was a calf strain early 2017 that took me out of the game for a while. But again, like my season of 2015, I could have thrown in the towel, and that wasn't an option for me because I had invested so much time and energy, and my family had sacrificed so much that I needed to keep going. So I got over that injury and trained for Ironman Cabo, which was a November race in 2017. And that was an age group specific race. So again, I strategically planned to do an age group race because I knew myself as an MAS athlete and what would work for me. And it was a heat race, which I did really well in the heat. And it was an age group race. So I think I got back to running maybe 8 weeks before Ironman Cabo and went into it and ended up winning it as the overall winner as the age group female champion. So that's the one that I really remember in my last few years as a competitor. And then I did earn my right to go back to Kona in 2018 from that race. And I got injured again right before Kona. I had an Achilles strain. So, getting old. And I knew in 2018 that I would be done. Like I really wanted to be done competing wise in 2017. And when that didn't happen from the first injury, I was like, okay, get myself ready for Cabo. And I got myself ready for Cabo, mustered out that win, and then was able to prepare for Kona only to get a Achilles injury again. So I would say my very last race was Kona. It was very emotional. It didn't end well for me. And, but some things, some things don't, right? And I remember posting something the day after Kona, like, well, you know what? It was my last race, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, right? So, things don't always work out, but we learn from them, and we remember the times that things just worked well, right? Things were in alignment wherever for things to work out the right way, and that doesn't always happen. So
I think it's interesting that you won Cabo, so you technically earned your pro license again.
I did, yeah.
Right?
I wasn't going to go back on that.
Yeah, no,
I was 46 by then.
but that's still exciting. I mean, after you retired, you still proved that you could
Yeah.
have done it. But yeah,
It's all
Yeah.
that feet acclimation. I tell people this story, and you had asked me, was quitting ever an option? And I'm like, absolutely not, because of the sacrifice. And I remember one summer, our air conditioning went in our house, and we didn't have enough money to fix the air conditioning. And I always say that was our character building few summers, because my daughters developed character sleeping without air conditioning, and I developed really great heat tolerance during that time sleeping without air conditioning. So, yeah, the sacrifices were worth it. And they may have even built me as a pretty durable athlete there for a while. We did eventually get our air conditioning
That's
fixed.
good. All for the greater good, though.
Yes, exactly.
So now looking back at it from the other side, would you make the same decision? Would you have?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my bank account might have been a little bit fuller, but the experiences and the knowledge and the grit I gained from it has only profited me in the game of life, right? And I would have absolutely have done the same thing.
Yeah. So you have three daughters, all of them who are
Mhm.
athletic, right? If one of them came to you and said, "Mom, I want to race pro," I mean, as a runner or a swimmer or a triathlete or wherever, as they came to you, what would your advice be to them?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, go for it, right? Do it while you can. And I mean, there's no question. Just, jumping off that cliff is the hardest thing to do. But, have confidence that we're going to figure out how to fly, right? We're going to learn how to fly. Like, and, I'm so proud of my daughters, and I think they've learned a lot from me. One of the things when I decided to go professional, my husband and I had some really long conversations. I wouldn't say he was too excited about it. But one thing he said to me is, the biggest benefit I see is our daughters seeing what you're doing and knowing that if they put their mind to something that seems unrealistic, that they might be able to do it. So
Yeah.
that was definitely a motivating factor for me. And I don't think they would even think twice about trying something hard. My oldest daughter is a type 1 diabetic, and I think some of the things that she observed and watched me do has helped her with her professional career. She is now works with Medtronic in the insulin pump um, sales and clinical role. So she inspires people every day to take that leap from trying an insulin pump on them and to see what that can do for them. My middle daughter went on and was a collegiate swimmer, and now she is one of the youngest NCAA collegiate coaches at Smith College in Massachusetts, head coach. So I'm a very proud mom there too. And then our youngest daughter she was a distance runner and went on to college despite some physical difficulties and injuries, managed to compete at a Division 1 level, and at the same time get ready for pre-med and take the MCATs. And we just found out 2 weeks ago she got accepted into Ohio State Medical School. So
Yay!
yeah, so I think I bred some very
Yeah.
strong-minded daughters and brought them up, and that, hey, we can do hard things. And I think if I just sort of gave up, my daughters would have seen that, and hopefully, if I gave up, they wouldn't have modeled that. So it pays off in the long run. So any moms listening out there, like, your kids are watching, little eyes are watching, and they're going to learn that hard work ethic and that stick to itness, from you as a mom
I
or a
mean,
parent or
they
a
were
parent.
old enough while you were a pro that I mean, they watch that. They're always going to remember everything that you went through. You don't have to tell them about it, It's not
Yeah.
like they were three
Yeah.
or
I mean,
four and we don't
it
know.
was It was hard. It was hard. Like, there were times I couldn't be at places or I was tired or, um, but it came down to my husband saying, you know what? I think we should do it because the girls are going to learn a lot from you from doing this, but there was a lot of sacrifices not having air conditioning for a few years, but it paid off for us.
So is there anything that you would change if you could?
Absolutely not. Nope. Nope. They built me, the sacrifices built me and my family and my daughters. And no, no, I think it's another quote, uh, the Apple guy, Stephen, what's his
Steve
name?
Jobs.
Steve
Steve
Jobs.
Jobs. Yeah.
So he says you can't really figure out the dots as you're moving forward, but when you look back, you can figure out how all the dots connected. That definitely is a story of this. This is, you look back and you're like, yep, I was connecting the dots along the way. It just brought me this way.
Right. Right. The path is often not a straight one,
Yes,
you
for
know.
sure.
Straight
Right.
paths aren't very interesting, right? You
No, they're
gotta
not.
twists
No.
and turns along the way. But what an amazing journey you've had, and just, so much that can be accomplished when you never give up and believe in yourself. Yeah.
For sure. Yep.
All right, Amy. Well, thanks for taking the time and sharing your story.
For
And
having me,
all the
Rain.
moms out there, listen, you can do it.
You can do it. Yep, for sure. Thank you
All
so much. It was a
right.
pleasure.